A narrow strait chokes a superpower's fleet. An army of 80,000 is swallowed in a day. A teenage peasant shatters an entire siege. These are 11 battles when empires gambled and history turned. War isn't the whole story of civilization, but it often decides who writes the next chapter. From antiquity to World War II, these are clashes that changed the course of history and shaped the world. Battle of Salamis, 480 BCE. When people picture the Greco-Persian Wars, they often go to Thermopylae, but the fight that truly stopped the invasion was at sea, in the Straits of Salamis. After Thermopylae, Xerxes pushed toward Athens with an enormous fleet. Themistocles baited him into the narrow channel near the city where numbers were a liability. In tight water, the larger Persian formation lost cohesion. Greek ships formed quickly, smashed the front ranks and sent vessels colliding into their own reserves or onto the shoals. The Persian fleet broke. Xerxes retreated across the Aegean and his remaining land forces were finished at Platae. Salamis ended the invasions and set the stage for Athens' rapid rise. Had Xerxes crushed Athens here, the rest of Greece might have followed, stunting the city-state that would dominate the next century, ending in the empire of Alexander the Great. But the sea had made its choice, and the invasion froze in place. Battle of Cannae, 216 BCE. Cannae was Rome's nightmare made real. Its most significant defeat in antiquity and among the bloodiest battles before modern war. After crossing the Alps, Hannibal had already humbled Roman armies at Trebia and Lake Trasimene. Rome answered with a massive force. On the plains near Cannae, Roman commanders tried to punch through a deliberately weak Carthaginian centre, expecting the weight of numbers to decide the day. It was the trap Hannibal designed. Strong flanks curled inward and enveloped the dense Roman formation. Surrounded and crushed for a lack of space to fight or flee, as many as 80,000 Romans died before nightfall. Panic seized the city. Desperate measures followed, enlisting slaves and younger men, consulting oracles, even human sacrifice. Yet Rome refused to yield. 14 years later, at Zama, Rome settled accounts. The meaning of Cannae, though, lay in what changed at home. Doctrine, command, and the path toward a professional army that would dominate the centuries to come. What looked like collapse became a blueprint for resilience, and Rome took notes. Battle of Arezzo, 105 BCE. Less famous than Cannae, but even costlier, Arezzo saw roughly 120,000 Romans destroyed by migrating Cimbri and Teutons. Two Roman commanders, Gnaeus Mallius Maximus and Quintus Servilius Caepio, let rivalry and arrogance split their forces across the Rhone. The enemy exploited the gap, pinning each Roman army against the river in turn and annihilating both. Shock rolled through Rome. In the aftermath, Gaius Marius rose to the consulship, and sweeping changes followed on his watch. Broader recruitment, more uniform equipment, and the cohort as a building block. The disaster also fed a public hunger for strongmen. Marius would hold 5 consecutive consulships, 7 in total, an early signal of how charisma and crisis could bend the Republic. Another epic defeat, another turning gear in Rome's long transformation. But the next pivot would test a different world entirely. Battle of Tours, 732 CE. Tours is the outlier, the victory whose meaning has been argued the most. The Umayyad Caliphate had swept across Spain and deep into France. Answering Odo of Aquitan's call, Charles Martel met the invaders. Using hills and forests for cover, the Franks absorbed cavalry charges and forced the Umayyad force to break off. Traditional histories cast the battle as the moment Islamic expansion into Europe was stopped and the Frankish realm secured. Recent scholarship complicates that picture. The army may have been a raiding party, the Caliphate's reach already stretched, and contemporary sources, Christian and Muslim, didn't mark Tours as decisive. Yet the victory's afterlife mattered. Martel leveraged it with the papacy, helping to usher in the Carolingian Renaissance. So was it a hinge or a legend? Either way, the story that followed shaped Europe's imagination of the past. Before we head east, a quick note. If this kind of storytelling is your thing, Consider subscribing to The Collector so you don't miss the next chapter. Thanks for being here. Siege of Constantinople, 717 to 718 CE. If a single fight checked the Umayyad advance more directly, it was the Siege of Constantinople. The Caliphate, taking advantage of Byzantine turmoil, drove to the capital and surrounded it by land and sea. A daring Byzantine naval relief force destroyed the besiegers' fleet. On land, winter bit hard. Reinforcements failed by sea and shore alike, and the besiegers, battered by storms on the retreat, had to abandon the effort. Unlike Tours, historians still see this as a bulwark. The Caliphate shifted from taking the city to raiding its borders, and Byzantium, rallying under Leo III, dominated its region for centuries after. The Fourth Crusade, Sack of Constantinople, 1204 CE. The blow that Byzantium couldn't absorb came not from the east, from the west. Called to retake Jerusalem and defeat the Egyptian Sultanate, Crusader host assembled in Venice. Smaller than planned, around 10,000 rather than 30. Unable to pay their shipbuilders, the Crusaders accepted Venetian demands and changed course, sacking Christian Zara to settle debts. Then came a second diversion, to Constantinople, to install Alexios, son of Emperor Isaac II Angelos. When Alexius was overthrown and killed, the Crusaders stormed the city and looted it for 3 days. Outraged, many went home. The army unravelled and never reached the Holy Land. Superior forces soon crushed what remained. The capital's destruction was the real legacy. Constantinople, the strategic shield against eastern expansion, was stripped of wealth, the empire fragmented, and recovery never came. The pathway open for the Ottoman conquest in 1453. Siege of Orleans, 1428 to 1429 CE. English victories, Agincourt, Crécy, Poitiers fill the spotlight. The turning point, though, was Orleans. In 1428, England held its strongest position in France, with battles won and Burgundy allied. Orleans looked like the key to a final collapse. French nobles urged the Dauphin to withdraw south, or maybe to Scotland. The Duke of Bedford, running the siege, refused a negotiated exit, angering Burgundy, which walked away. Into this deadlock stepped Joan of Arc, a peasant girl who believed she was sent to see the Dauphin crowned. She rallied the defenders into audacious sorties that broke the siege within 9 days. Momentum surged. A reinforced French army moved to Rheims, where the Dauphin was crowned. From there, France clawed back territory, and by 1453, England held little on the continent. A city saved, crown secured, and the war's balance quietly flipped. Battle of Mengjiang, 1597 CE. This is the stunning upset. 13 Joshan warships and 1,500 men against 200 to 300 Japanese vessels. Admiral Yi Sun-sin had been undermined by rivals and politics. Defeats erased his earlier gains, and the sea route to the Yellow Sea looked open. Yi chose the Mengjiang Strait, a narrow passage where tide and terrain could fight on his side. When the larger fleet pressed in, the strait turned numbers into chaos. Joshan ships aligned and shattered the head of the advance, forcing a retreat and pushing the invaders to try Korea's west coast instead. With Ming's help, that effort failed too. Mengjiang turned the campaign into a Japanese disaster, contributing to political instability and ultimately the road to Sekigahara. 13 ships had held a sea, and with it, a kingdom's future. Battle of Borodino, 1812 CE. Austerlitz and Waterloo define the arc of Napoleon's story, but Borodino was its bloodiest day, and the hinge of the Russian campaign. The Grande Armée rolled east in 1812, racking up victories while the Russians avoided pitched battle. Near Moscow, Field Marshal Kutuzov chose ground at Borodino and dug in. Some 300,000 men clashed as France tried to seize the points needed to springboard into the capital. The Russians held and bled the attackers. Napoleon won the field, but he held back his guard, unwilling to spend them for a decisive break. Kutuzov withdrew to Moscow, then ordered the city abandoned and the land ravaged. Napoleon entered a ruin, waited for a surrender that never came, and found his supplies overextended as winter closed. The retreat began, and with it the unspooling of the empire. Disease, cold, hunger, and Russian harassment tearing the army apart. A victory that led straight to defeat. Borodino set the trap that the season would spring. Battle of Warsaw, 1920 CE. Between the World Wars, Eastern Europe's fights are often overlooked, but Warsaw was decisive. Poland, newly defined by the Treaty of Versailles, faced the Soviet Union, which was still in the midst of revolution and civil war, but was consolidating. In 1920, Soviet forces smashed Polish defences and closed on the capital. Then came a last-ditch plan, mocked by Polish commanders and called suicidal by Soviet leaders, to strike from the south and sever overextended supply lines. Cracked Soviet codes allowed Polish units to move quickly. The counterblow landed, and Bolshevik armies reeled back from Warsaw. The failure ended the immediate Soviet threat. In the aftermath, blame fell on Joseph Stalin, then commanding a Soviet contingent which was accused of disobeying orders to reinforce Mikhail Tukhachevsky. Poland secured a peace that guaranteed its independence for a time and checked the spread of communism further west. Against the odds, a capital held, and a revolution's road stopped at the Vistula. Battle of Stalingrad, 1942 to 1943 CE. Stalingrad was a scale and shock. Up to 4 million casualties, roughly 1.5 million dead, and the pivot of the Second World War. In 1942, Nazi Germany dominated Europe and drove deep into the Soviet Union towards the Caucasus oil fields. Hitler fixated on the city that bore his rival's name and poured men and material into a frontal assault, stretching the flanks of Army Group South. The fight developed into brutal urban combat. At one point, German units were within 100 metres of the Volga, close to cutting reinforcement routes. Waves of defenders crossed under fire. The line held. Winter stalled the attack, giving Soviet commanders space to plan. On November the 19th, Operation Uranus struck, smashing through Axis flanks held by Italian, Hungarian and Romanian troops, and encircling the city. Hitler forbade a breakout and bet on air resupply. It failed. Field Marshal Frederick Paulus, first German field marshal ever to surrender, gave up the Sixth Army. The psychological effect was immediate. Propaganda cracked. The aura of invincibility collapsed. From then on, the Red Army pushed west to Berlin. What seemed unstoppable finally stopped, and the war's momentum reversed for good. Across 2 millennia, these 11 clashes show how quickly power can invert. By a strait that nullifies numbers, a siege broken in 9 days, a winter that humbles an empire. Each battle lived on not just in memory, but in what it made possible next. When armies met and plans met chance, the course of history bent, and the next chapters were written by those who survived to turn the page.